This video is inspired by a comment I received from Waste Couture. Thanks for this. Have you ever successfully stabilized using a Metabones, speedbooster, ultra, and Canon glass? Now, the thing is, I do it all the time, which is what I mentioned here in this video. The challenge that Waste Couture was having was that he has an FX30 using the Metabones City Booster and a Canon 24-105 f4 zoom lens. Both adapter and camera are upgraded to the latest firmware. I get an error saying that no lens data was recorded, and if I override that, the result is a zoomed in 10,000x. It's a bloody mess. Any thoughts on what could be the problem and the solution? Now, we did go back and forth, and I recommended a software to try out called Gyroflow. But before we do that, there's a couple things I wanted to point out here within Catalyst Browse, if one hasn't already done so. So I've selected here a clip. This is a dojo tour that I did for my other channel called the Strength Dojo, where I document martial arts, fitness, and jiu-jitsu content. What we have here is when you open up Catalyst Browse, you select your clip, you right click, or you can click on to stabilize. And then when you click on analyze the clip, it says preview not analyzed, but the moment you click on analyze, clip does not contain metadata, which could result in incorrect stabilization. You want to continue? Yes, proceed. You override that, analyzes the clip. It takes a moment depending on the speed of your system, but once it is analyzed, you will see something that looks like this. You'll see a motion graph capturing some of the data, or showcasing rather the data that's been captured in terms of your motion and movement. And then you will also see some cropping amount. What I like to do is I like to go to manual, and then from here I like to set the cropping amount. Now, one thing that I've noticed is when you adjust the cropping amount, if you find that your thing is all the way up to here, like a full 1.0 crop, it's 100% crop, then you want to dial that back, obviously. And when you dial it back, you'll see that there's a dotted line here. And what I like to do is I like to bring that dotted line kind of close to more or less where a lot of the activity is going to be covered. So if I'm at a 0.9, or I might just select dot 1, and I'll do dot 1, and that pretty much covers the entire movement, right? And so from here I click on playback, and you'll notice how much more smooth the stabilized footage is with relation to the rest of the clip. So this is the original clip on the left, and then this is the stabilized clip on the right. If you, for any reason, are having some issues, or you don't want to be saddled with the limitations of Catalyst Browse, among those limitations is if you are using the free version. If I'm not mistaken, it has been the case in some of the older versions where if you have recorded 10-bit footage, the ZV-E10 is 8-bit, so it's not that big an issue. But if you recorded 10-bit footage, from what I understand, Catalyst Browse, when it does the stabilization and it's the free version, then it will export out into 8-bit, which sucks. And so if you don't want to be saddled with that limitation and you haven't paid for I guess the subscription side of Catalyst Prepare, then you can move on to another software called Gyroflow. Once you've got Gyroflow opened up, all right, so from here, go ahead and open up the file. The file that I was using was 1090.mp4. So 1080p.1090.mp4, click on open, okay? And now you'll notice your lens profile is now loaded lens profile on your camera. This is where it helps to know the focal lengths that you shot your footage at. This is why I actually prefer and advise using prime lenses. But if you are going to be using any sort of zoom lens, like in this case, I have the Sony ZV-E10 with a Metabones speed booster and a Tokina 28 to 70 millimeter zoom lens. And I really like this lens. The quality and the image that comes out of this lens is beautiful. The lens profile that you want to load is going to be based in the focal length. So if you're using a Sony, in this case, there's a particular profile set called FX30, right? And so when that comes up, you'll see a bunch of different focal lengths for the FX30, and in that you will pick the appropriate focal length. Now you'll notice that this footage earlier was shot in a wide angle as well as a tight angle. So the wide angle would probably be closer to something like 35 millimeters. So type in 35, let's see what comes up. 135 millimeter Canon FD. Sure, I'll take that. And I select that. the key thing is here is the focal length, making sure that the focal length is selected. If I play this back and I press play, and I also want to ensure this is the full field of view that is being captured, you'll notice there's a lot of stabilization that's being done. So if I disable that portion, this looks pretty smooth. If we play that back again from the front and I disable, this is what it looks like originally, and this is the smoothed out version. So 35mm was the appropriate focal length to be capturing this at. I want to showcase to you what happens when you zoom in the footage itself. From here, we're at 35mm for the most part, and then boom, I zoomed in. And for the most part, it's rather smooth, but it could be smoother. But I'm surprised at the fact that at 35mm, it was, but you'll notice it's not as smooth as I would like it to be. This is more or less 70mm. So what I'm going to do, again, FX6V, and then I'll select 70mm, see what comes up. And I see an option for 70mm. Go ahead and I select that. And then based on that focal length data, super smooth, super smooth. What I will end up doing is I will render this clip out twice. I will render it once at 35mm because part of the footage is in 35mm on the zoom. And then I'll render out again at 70mm because I had zoomed in on the lens. So this way, when I'm doing the editing, I'll just splice in the 70mm stabilized portion and with the 35mm stabilized portion at the appropriate focal length. So that's the only thing you need to be cognizant of when you have shot on your Sony camera with an adapted lens. Keep in mind, all of these numbers here are based on the 35mm full frame standard. So if you are using a pass-through filter, this is also a Metabones speed booster, but it's a pass-through one. And so if you're using this, but you're using the same lens, you have to keep that in mind. So if I were to adapt a 24mm lens using a pass-through, I'm gonna be stabilizing that at closer to maybe 35mm because in reality, that's the field of view that I'm getting. So that's the only thing that you need to be cognizant of. Now, a couple more minor details after you've selected your footage and you stabilize. And keep in mind, I'm doing a lot of talking here. I'm just really walking you through the process of making sure your footage is super stable. Once you dialed in your settings, all you got to do is load in each one of your clips. You've already selected your lens profile. You've already dialed in your settings on the right here. And you could, instead of clicking on export, you click on add to render queue. So you can add all the files that you want one by one, and then you can render it all in unison as a batch process. So that's something to keep in mind. But minor details, something to keep in mind is the rolling shutter correction. This right here is a godsend. The ZV-E10 has some really terrible rolling shutter. So if I were to disable that and I were to show you exactly what I mean, you know, in the Prazo, it's actually not so bad, but there's going to be, there you go. See, you see that jelloing, stretching effect of the clip. This is something that the ZV-E10 and the A7C even at full frame, and the A7C Mark II, A7 IV at full frame mode, they're gonna suffer with a lot of jelloing, and so you put in that rolling shutter correction. If I'm not mistaken, the FX30 is about 15 milliseconds, so you want to put in the appropriate number here so that you're stabilizing. And let me tell you exactly what those numbers are, because I actually have a little cheat sheet here for the FX30 even. Okay, so on the FX30 itself, these are the numbers. So if you're recording at 4K 24, you're looking at, or even 4K 60, you're looking at a 16.1 millisecond, and that's the number you gotta enter right here in terms of the rolling shutter correction. If you're on the FX3, right, these are your numbers: 7.6 at 120 frames per second, 8.7 milliseconds on 4K 60 and 4K 24. With the A7C, it's 24 milliseconds. If you're in the crop mode, you got 13 milliseconds. In fact, A7C Mark I, A7C Mark II, A7 IV, crop mode is the mode that you want to be in for video. Add a focal reducer and boom, you've got some really good sensor readout rolling shutter performance in that. 4K 30, you're going to get 17.2 milliseconds. A7C Mark II and A7 IV, you got 26.5 versus 12.8. For the ZV-E10, it's 33 milliseconds officially, 27 for 4K 30. But again, if I go to 40.22, which is like the maximum, that kind of gives me the best results in general. So that's the rolling shutter correction bit. The other factor has to do with the stabilization settings themselves. Generally speaking, like 0.1 is between 0.1 and 0.15 is where I like to be for the most part, without cropping in too much. And with relation to this here, 0.8 or 0.7 or 0.6 for max smoothness, and then max smoothness at high velocity, 0.06 or 0.07. It tends to work really well. So if I'm here at 70 millimeters, but if you want something smoother, right, feel free to bring it up to like a 0.01.6. Same thing here, 0.1.6. And then from here, bring the max smoothness up to maybe 0.7 to match the higher up. And so you'll see there might be a little bit different. See, there we go, a little bit more smooth with relation to the camera movement and everything else. And this is the before. If we look at this is the beforehand, right? You saw that? Whereas now this is the after. Much smoother. Make sure those settings are dialed in with relations to stabilization, rolling shutter, export settings. You can choose whatever. I just keep to H.264 at 3840 by 2160, and whatever the bit rate is, 92 megabits per second. Maybe just make it 100 because that's the original footage, but because it's going to crop in, you're losing some data. That's why it says 92. 92 is fine. And then from there, you go ahead and export. I hope that was helpful. Try to keep this as short and as simple as possible without getting too nitty gritty. I personally, between using Catalyst Browse and Gyroflow, my preference is Gyroflow. Gyroflow will be easier if you use prime lenses because then you don't have to render out the files twice and then match them up later. Whereas in Catalyst Browse, it automatically detects your focal length and you will end up with one file. But if you're not paying for it, you're not paying for the subscription for Catalyst Prepare, you're gonna get an 8-bit output. Apparently, if I'm dated in this understanding, then do let me know in the comments below. But this has been the case from what I've understood. The quality of the footage that I get processed through Gyroflow, I feel like is better than Catalyst Browse in terms of the free version. That's about it. Again, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. My name is Belal Khan, coming at you from Space City, aka Houston. I'll see you soon.